Did you scrape your tongue today?
I think that I did, but I don't
Re
remember,
I feel like you
actually.
would remember that.
I feel like I do it every morning, so I probably did it. Like, it's like
Yeah.
a I was gonna say it's an acid reflux, but I think I just meant a
Oh,
reflex.
fun fact, Melissa and I, when we first met, we learned that we're both scrapers. We both scrape our
Tongue
tongue.
scrapers.
It's this little looks like a horseshoe. It's a metal horseshoe that, yeah, every morning, especially after coffee, you just rake that across your tongue and all the badness gets washed down the
People are
sink.
gonna turn us off when they hear this.
Too bad. Personal hygiene is no laughing matter, Melissa.
Yeah, and if you're going to work right now, if you're getting ready for work and listening to this, scrape your tongue.
People notice.
33, 1, 0. Main event of the evening. Wednesday, and half past
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Murder Unscripted, the show that shatters the fourth wall and immerses you in the true crime genre like no one else. I'm your host, Ed Hydock, along with, as always, the mouth of the South, my co-host, Melissa Spivey.
I love that, but I don't live in the South, but I still like it.
Nothing rhymed with North.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
Now I'm just trying to think of words.
I just stumbled there. I'm going North, Fourth. I just go through the alphabet like Orth, Borth, Corth, Dorth, Fourth, nothing, Fourth.
Fourth.
We are in our second week of November in a block we are calling Friends Till the End. And it's a block featuring cases where friends either stick it out till the bitter end together or friends who commit cold blooded murder together, just like we saw last week when Melissa told us that freaking awful story of Jason Sweeney, who was beaten to death in the Fishtown neighborhood of Philadelphia. And I have to say, going to that scene really gave you a sense of just how terrifying it must have been for Jason. I mean, I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean, like, even though, like, we went during the day, that trail was so desolate, and, like, it wasn't easy to get to either, so it's not like we were gonna stumble upon people, but, like, it was so desolate, it was dirty, it was littered, it was creepy, and I just can't even imagine being, like, cornered or lured there by your friends, quote, unquote.
The whole case was freaking awful. And unfortunately, this week doesn't get a whole lot better. But it does involve a much different group of people, which I'll get into in a minute. But first, I want to take a second here to kind of set this story up because it does have a very special meaning to me. So go back about a year and a half to the summer of 2003, and I was working for Cold Case Files as a field producer. And this was kind of an unprecedented time because as we were producing this show, I forget how many episodes it was, 20 maybe. Um, we also got an order for a spin-off series. And usually like the spin-off series will come by itself. You know, it'll be a Cold Case Files spin-off series that you're working on. But this was like they asked us to do it in addition to our core Cold Case Files episode. So it was like we were juggling regular episodes and then this spin-off. And one of them was about, there were two spin-offs actually. So one was about murders in the West, and we're talking Wyoming, Texas, Montana, cowboy country, basically. And the other one was called Cold Case Files Murder in the Bayou. So basically, I had spent the entire summer filming these 6 episodes in Louisiana, Mississippi. I did one in Galveston, Texas. And I was surprised to learn Galveston was Bayou country. I had no idea. And I have to say, though, you do not even know heat and humidity until you are in that part of the country in the dead of August. I mean, I've never sweat so much in my life. I was fatter then, too. I was a fat bastard. And it was just like you walk outside and you're just like dinner plates instantly. And you're trying to conduct interviews in this heat. And we obviously film inside, but you can't have these noisy air conditioners. We're filming in these old houses that have antique like window units or very old systems. And good luck trying to do a quiet interview. So you almost have to pick,
Oh my
run the air
god.
conditioner or do the interview. So we would do it in blasts. It would be like, let's pause the interview, take 15 minutes, and then back to the interview. but it is a wild story and a story that means a lot to me. And to tell you this story, we're going to need to dust off the old time machine, Melissa. I know it's got a tarp on it. We haven't used it in a couple weeks, but I need you to take us back to Starkville, Mississippi in 1990.
It has been a while, but I got you.
Nice.
Now, do I have my music or do I need to make my own sound effects? Because mine are pretty great.
You have music, but feel free to ad lib.
Beep boop, beep boop.
Perfect.
All right, so we are back in 1990, the start of literally the best decade ever that I have yet to come out. Fight me on that, Ed. Seriously, come at me. And let me just say, like, the top song of 1990 is hands down my favorite song of all time. It's Hold On by Wilson Phillips.
Oh my God.
Fucking iconic. Like, I'm so excited just talking about it. I'm going to listen to it as soon as we're done. You hold on for one more day. Such a great song.
It's not.
And actually, the top 3 box office hits were pretty epic as well. Like Ghost with Demi Moore and Patrick Swayze, Pretty Woman with Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, and Home Alone with Macaulay Culkin and Joe Pesci. They were the top 3 movies that year, which
they were pretty epic movies.
Right? I'm like, yeah. Oh my God, when was the last time we had 3 such great movies? In the top news and current events, some of the big things that happened that year, the Hubble telescope was launched into space. Nelson Mandela was freed from prison. And actually, in true crime news, the biggest art theft in history took place that year at the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston. And oh my God, that's such a wild case, and it's still unsolved.
Yeah, it's not solved. They never caught the person who did that.
From what I hear, it's like there is no clues. Like, it is just like, we don't know. Like,
Google that, guys. That's a crazy story. It's a crazy case.
So much amazing art. It's just incredible that is still unsolved and that the people managed to do it almost like so easily. It seems.
I know. It's very Ocean's 11.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that is our trip back in time to 1990. Beep boop, beep boop.
I can't believe people don't understand that's not a real time machine.
I know, right? Sounds legit.
Not just a series of beeps and boops.
Nope.
Well, as far as my take on Starkville, the one thing I learned that becomes so obvious the second you get into that town is these folks love their college football, especially the Mississippi State Bulldogs. And literally everywhere you look is maroon and white. And it's just a bustling kind of campus community. But venture away from the stadium and you find this, like, it's not, I wouldn't call it Mayberry, but it's a lot of old world charm mixed with highways and shopping centers. And when you go into town, it's an older area with small houses. I didn't see many big towering houses when I was down there, but about a mile away from the town's main square is this little tiny house on US 82. And it sits back off the road a little bit, and there's a little parking pad up front. It was very weird. I've never seen a parking pad like that out front of the house, but it's next to a church. And by all accounts, you would think this is a pretty safe place, right?
It seems like it. ...
Well, think again, because on the evening of September 3rd, 1990, around 9 o'clock at night, dispatchers at the Starkville police get a chilling 911 call from a woman who identifies herself as 81-year-old Kathryn Crigler. And she owns the little home that I was just referencing with the parking pad. And I should mention here that Kathryn was also at the time in a wheelchair. She had one of her legs amputated. Kathryn tells police that a young man has just broken into her home and brutally attacked her and her friend, 65-year-old Betty Jones. And on the call, Kathryn tells the dispatcher, quote, "Tonight there was one single boy, a young man, and he went in the front room where my friend was, and he came back with his hands all bloody. And then he raped me. I know, it's just horrible."
Ew, the person raped an 81-year-old? Like, that's a whole new level of seriously disturbed.
Yeah.
That poor woman. She must have been like barely able to speak on that call. I can't even imagine.
You would think so, but if you hear this call, Melissa, I'll try to get my hands on it again. It's the strength of this woman. If you listen to it, you would never know what she just went through.
your name's Miss Crigler?
Yes, tonight there was one single boy, young man, and he went in the front room where my friend was, and he came back in with his hands all bloody, and then he raped me. I know I did. It's just terrible.
She was cool, calm, and collected, honest to God, the whole time. But as you're about to learn, she had no idea the true extent of what happened. So Oktibbeha County Sheriff Dolph Bryan is one of the first officers to arrive, and this crime hits Dolph hard because he'd known Kathryn since his childhood. They actually grew up on the same street. So as you'll be able to see, the memory of what he saw that day, it still haunts him. I mean, even to this day. So in the kitchen, Sheriff Bryan finds Kathryn crumpled on the floor, Kathryn Crigler, and she's severely injured and barely conscious at this time. But even when she's being transported to the hospital, Kathryn can't stop talking about her friend Betty Jones, who was in the front room. She's like, "Is Betty okay? Is Betty okay? What's wrong with Betty? How is she?" And spoiler alert, in case you can't tell, she's not okay. So moving into the living room, Sheriff Bryan finds Betty Jones lying dead in a pool of blood. She'd been stabbed numerous times and her throat had been slashed.
Oh my God. And like, it's so sweet though that she was so worried like about her friend, like not concerned for her own injuries, but she just was like, "Oh my God, where's Betty? Is Betty okay?" Like that's a true ride or die friend right there.
Absolutely. She was a tough old girl, you know? I
Yeah.
mean, she really I wish I could have played you this 911 call beforehand because you'll be like, "This woman, I'm sorry, what just happened to this woman?" Like it's like talking to
Wow.
your grandma on the phone. So, I was very taken aback by it. But as the paramedics take her away, Kathryn has no idea the terrible fate that Betty suffered. So in the living room where there's a baseball game still playing on the television. So it's a pretty creepy atmosphere. But Sheriff Bryan finds the 65-year-old victim lying dead in a pool of blood with her throat cut. So I want to take a step back and get into the victimology of these two women. I'd mentioned that Kathryn Crigler was a lifelong resident of Starkville, but so was Betty Jones, and she had a super cool backstory. Not only was Betty adored by her friends and family, she was loved by the entire Starkville community because she was the team mom, essentially, for the Mississippi State University's baseball team and like the booster club.
Oh.
And when she died, several players spoke out, including a guy named Will Clark. So you won't know who that is, but some sports fans who listen might know. He went on to be a 6-time All-Star first baseman for I think the Giants, I believe he played for the Cardinals, the Rangers, the Orioles. A bunch. He's a very famous. He's actually fairly outspoken now too. He's still in the public eye.
Hmm.
But one of the coolest parts about Betty and her role in the team was that this was the age where everybody was like chewing tobacco and you put it in your lip. So all these players
Ew,
had that big
yeah.
wad, yep, and they're spitting out their tobacco. So Betty would actually bring bubble gum for the players and be like, "No tobacco for you. Here's some bubble gum," like trying to keep them on the straight and narrow. So,
That's so cute. She like
right.
loved them. Oh, that's so cute.
She really did, and they loved her back. And that's when I told you earlier that there was a baseball game on TV. That's kind of where her love of the game stemmed from. Was her love of the
Oh,
university team. So
that's so sweet.
it is. And outside of baseball, Betty's life revolved around giving back. So while she was a widow, a mother, a grandmother, she was remarkably dedicated to serving others. She sponsored a family of Cambodian refugees and helped them adjust to life in Starkville, basically.
Wow.
Yeah. So she was also an active member of Starkville's first Presbyterian church. When I mentioned the house was right by a church, it was the one right next door to her house. So
Right
she was a
next door,
member there.
yeah.
Yep. She served on a bunch of different committees. She taught Sunday school. And it was the same church that's where she met Kathryn Crigler. That's how they became such good friends.
That's so cute.
It is cute.
It's like
So
so wholesome.
it is. It is. They were just good people, good, wholesome
Yeah.
Southern people. So Kathryn Crigler was actually a retired school teacher and an alumnus of the Mississippi College for Women. She was also a very gifted pianist and loved to sing in the choir at church. So she wanted to be, I think, a pianist she was very good at the piano. Like if she had a dream job, it would be like some kind of concert pianist.
That's so
Um,
cool. Good for
yeah,
her.
exactly. So Mrs. Crigler, she'd lost her husband to cancer a bunch of years earlier and was a cancer survivor herself. And she had a host of other health problems, and it's kind of what caused her to lose her leg. I don't want to speculate. I don't know if I ever figured out what caused the amputation, but something she was going through, she had to have a leg amputated. But
Mm.
she was even dealing with some ailments at the time of her murder because that's the reason Betty was over to begin with. She was taking some new medication and wasn't sure how she was going to react. So Betty had offered to come sit with her.
Oh my god, so she was just there to, like, help out.
Yeah, and that's an incredibly sad part, and it's my understanding that Kathryn actually had a caretaker, but because the caretaker had come over so many days in a row, Kathryn told the caretaker, like, "Take a day off, like, not a big deal,
Yeah.
Betty will fill in." That makes this thing extra tragic. It's just circumstantial, like, if none of this happened, Betty would have never been there.
And I feel like that happens a lot, like, especially, like, if something happens at a workplace, it's like the person who got killed wasn't supposed to be there, they just picked up a shift to help out, or, like, something totally crazy that they shouldn't have really been there.
Right, and the way I look at it is that if Betty Jones wasn't there, that house was still we're gonna learn more about the crime in itself, but Kathryn may have still been a victim. It may have just saved Betty's life, you know? So I don't know if I
Mhm.
think that the house is what ends up being attractive to this perpetrator, not so much the people in it. I wanna get into what's going on at the crime scene, but first, I wanna tell you guys about what's going on with Kathryn Crigler because she's down at the hospital speaking with police. And although she's extremely weak, she manages to share the chilling details of what happened earlier that evening. Catherine recalls how after dinner, she and Betty changed into their nightgowns and they were basically getting ready for bed, and they were going to sit down and just watch a baseball game before they went to sleep.
This makes me so happy, it's like a bestie sleepover.
That's what it was.
I love that.
Get our PJs on and snuggle up and watch a
That's so
ball
cute.
game. It was. So just before 9 o'clock, the women are still getting ready. Catherine's in her room, and I'm not sure where Betty was at the time, but there's a knock at the door, and Betty goes to answer it, and the second she cracks that door open, somebody barges in. And all Catherine hears is just screaming, and she's in a wheelchair at this point because she has one leg, so she's like trying to get to her friend. But before she could make sense of what was happening, a stranger suddenly appeared in front of her and raped and strangled her before fleeing and leaving her for dead.
This poor woman survives cancer, survives losing her leg, and then she's attacked and raped. Like, what the hell?
It's
That's like, I
it's
got nothing.
unfathomable. It really is unfathomable. And I've used that word. I've run out of adjectives to describe the actions of these people that do these
I agree.
monsters.
That's why I get creative sometimes.
You're as creative as they come. So, despite being severely injured, Kathryn Crigler was able to kind of rally her strength. And she wasn't able to walk, but she tucked a pillow underneath her and used it as like a slide. She pulled herself to the kitchen where this was in the age of corded phones. So
Right.
she was able to like flick the cord and get the phone to fall down into her hands where she called 911.
Wow.
And at the hospital, doctors treat Catherine for a broken hip, broken ribs, and a bunch of internal injuries. And they also performed a rape kit, and technicians were actually able to recover a semen sample. Unfortunately, because of the age we were in, the sample was just too small to be used for anything important.
Yeah. In 1990, DNA had just come out, like, what, 2, 3 years ago?
Yeah, I'd have to look up the exact date when
Yeah, I think it was,
things
like, 87, 88.
that's in the ballpark. Yeah, in different parts of the country were doing different things at different times, so it took a while for it all to come together. But long story short, that semen sample in the rape kit was not enough to do anything with.
Mm,
So the cool thing is, though, Catherine Crigler is able to give a description of her attacker, and she recalls that he had short, spiky blonde hair, or maybe light brown,
mhm.
stark blue eyes, and a tan complexion. And this is super important because she described his complexion as swarthy. And I'm sorry to weirdly pronounce that, but it's a word that I don't use very often. And I think I know what it means, but have you ever heard of the term swarthy?
I don't know what it means.
That's okay. No, no, no. It could be like tan or dark complected, like maybe it's somebody with a tan or
Okay. Right, like, she
you know.
didn't know the person.
No, she didn't. But the next part is super sad because once Catherine gives all this information to police, that's when she learns the heartbreaking truth that her friend Betty died during this altercation.
Oh.
And almost immediately, Kathryn Crigler's family notices a huge difference in her demeanor. So it's like the life had been sucked out of her. I mean, she started to decline rapidly after that with the loss of her good friend and the traumatic rape and assault that she suffered herself.
Well, if you think about it, the woman's 81. She has been through so much, and then to add this trauma on top of it, like, that's wild. That's just so much for the human body to have to process.
The whole world was against her, and she still, I don't know, she still managed to make this 911 call and help police eventually solve this case. Without her, this doesn't get solved. So now that we've heard Kathryn Crigler's versions of what she witnessed that night, let's head back to the crime scene and find out what police are learning. So by now, the Oktibbeha County Sheriff's Office had teamed up with the Starkville PD. So now you got the locals and the county officials working together, and they scour the home for any physical evidence. And they managed to collect a couple fingerprints, some hair fibers, a few cigarette butts, actually. And that's important because neither of these women smoked. So this is a lot like Susan Woods. You got cigarettes there, and it's like Susan didn't smoke, so it's the same situation. You got Catherine and Betty who neither smoke, so this obviously most certainly belonged to the killer.
Oh, wow, but just like we said, there's not much they can do in 1990, but at least they knew to, like, bag it up. Like, I think that's so incredible.
Yeah, this was the age when things were DNA was getting over the hump. So I mean, I think it was in people's minds now, like detectives'
Mhm.
minds, to start preserving this stuff for down the road. So even if they couldn't solve it, this will be helpful. They can see technology cracking through.
That foresight is amazing.
It is, and I guess it's through training and through just scouring the things that other departments are doing and things that are being done nationally and globally. Because there were some instances of DNA being used in England at the time. So it's
Oh,
like
wow.
keeping up to date on new technology. So one of the things they could do was pretty basic and obvious, though. You could find someone that smokes that particular brand of cigarettes. And
Yeah.
by 1990, they did have PCR testing, polymerase chain reaction, which meant they no longer needed like a blood sample. They could start to use other things to get DNA from. And unfortunately, though, there really were no national databases at this time. And so it had to be kind of a one-to-one comparison, meaning like we got here's your suspect, here's your DNA. Is it the same? I guess is the best way to explain it.
Right.
So for now, the detectives simply bag the evidence and try to preserve it as best as they can in hopes that it comes in handy down the road. And as for a motive, police are at a complete loss because these are two little old women, for lack of a better word, and who
Mhm.
would never hurt a fly, who were kind of pillars of their community, and they had no known enemies. And aside from 28 bucks missing from Catherine's purse, all the other valuables in the house kind of remained untouched. So that indicated that robbery was probably not the motive. Like, I don't know if you I think if you're going in there to rob the place, you don't just take 28 bucks from a purse, you take anything you can find. So it was a very confusing motive.
Well, and I also don't feel like a petty thief or, like, someone there just to rob for some money or jewelry or whatever, like, they're not gonna be as violent as they were. Like, I don't feel like robbery gone wrong is really that like, I don't feel like that actually happens all that much.
Right. And honest to God, the second I read this case, I was like, drug dealer. Like it
Yeah.
screamed. They bothered to steal the 28 bucks, which would be, like, enough to get your fix, but the
Mhm.
violence told me that whoever did this was probably heavily under the influence. Like, because of who these women were, like, this had to be some kind of psycho drug trip. Maybe this guy just went off because he didn't know where he was or what he was doing in the act of trying to rob them. That was kinda what jumped out to me.
See, for me, I feel like this is very personal.
Right, but think about the women, though, like, who would have a vendetta against these women?
It's almost like mistaken identity, like somebody went to the wrong house or something like that, like or they expected, like, the caretaker to be there and not Betty, you know what I mean? Like, it's just so I don't know, it's either very personal or, like and, like, the person was very angry. Like, that's a lot of violence that that person inflicted.
I always thought it was weird that they did this to Betty, but then kind of left Catherine. Maybe they thought she was dead, or but I don't see Catherine in the heat of all this. Kathryn Crigler playing dead. So I mean, they had to
Right.
see that she was there, not dead. So I'm curious why they left her alive. That always stuck out
That's
to me as strange.
yeah,
But
you're right, that's super weird.
yeah. So, but one thing was for sure is that this brutal crime left residents of this typically quiet community deeply shaken.
Mhm.
According to the Starkville Daily News, quote, hardly a conversation ends without some mention of the heinous crimes perpetrated against two women in our community. So, with their kind of small town sense of safety now shattered, that article advised they were like, we know there's an uptick in guns, people purchasing guns, but be careful because pizza guys still make deliveries. People still go to the wrong house. People still have car trouble and need help.
Mhm.
The community was on edge, but police were also like, we get it, but please exhibit caution because what you're doing could lead to more violence if you're not careful, you know?
Absolutely, or like vigilante justice.
Hmm. Absolutely. So, as a standard procedure, police do conduct a canvass of the area, asking residents and store owners whether they noticed kind of anyone or anything unusual the night of the crime. And once you see this area, that you'll understand why the suspects far and wide. I mean, it's a heavily there were a lot of suspects in this case. For example, because this is the home to Mississippi State University, Starkville has a large transient student population. So
Mhm.
these people are rotating in and out every semester. They're going home for the weekend. You got friends coming over. So that was obviously an avenue that they explored. And Kathryn's house was also just located off US 82, which when I was there was not it's a bigger road, but in 1990 apparently it was like the major highway. So and that left some detectives to wonder if this could have been a trucker,
Mhm.
somebody who just could have driven through town, committed this crime, and been back on the highway before anyone knew what happened.
Yeah, someone just passing through. That's kinda what I thought when you had said she lived, like, off of a highway.
The house was also next to that church, and the victims both attended there. And Betty was helping with a mission for people battling substance abuse and addiction. So there was another thought that maybe the perpetrator could have been someone who had relapsed and kind of carried out the crime while they were all high. So,
Yeah.
so based on Catherine's description, though, police released this very rudimentary sketch of what the suspect looks like because she knew his complexion, she knew his hairstyle, like it was like a crew cut, and his like swarthy complexion. So she had a lot of good information to give, this forensic artist. So a sketch was released, and tips began pouring in. And it wasn't long before police got a significant break. A few residents suggested they look at Catherine's neighbor, who they claim matches the description to a T. And they also kind of bring up some odd things that this guy does, and it's kind of unsettling. And most notably is this kid's fascination with knives. And that last
Mhm.
detail especially caught police's attention because the killer had slashed Betty's throat. So, based on that information, detectives believe that this young man is somebody that they need to question.
Yeah, but Catherine said she didn't recognize her attacker. Wouldn't she know her neighbor?
Once I tell you about this kid, you'll understand why they probably didn't really interact, or I doubt it was somebody she ever really like even saw up close. This house where he lived was down a little bit, and he was
Okay,
like a college age kid, so I mean it really wasn't somebody that she would interact with.
gotcha.
So the neighbor in question is identified as a young man named Evan Fager. And when he's brought into the station for questioning, police immediately notice his kind of physical traits. He's got tan, swarthy skin, like short blonde hair, and these striking blue eyes. So he matches the description of the assailant to a T.
Wow.
So as far as an alibi goes, Evan Fager claims that on the night of the attack, he was throwing a house party not far from where Catherine lived, and that's where he was all night. So, unfortunately, police interview several of the guests, and they recall that Evan had left at some point during the evening. And given it was only about 150 feet from Catherine's place, he could have easily slipped away during that time period, committed these murders, and come back. So, it kind of wasn't a great alibi, but an alibi
Hmm.
nonetheless. So, and as police dig deeper, their suspicions grow because, along with confirming his reported fascination with knives, this kid actually made knives. Like he would home make knives. And
Oh.
his girlfriend actually talked to police and was like, he cut me once. It was an accident, but she had like a cut on her butt. And
Oh
he
my
was like, he
god.
was like playing with a knife and it cut her. So even though it
Mm.
was an accident, I mean, you got this kid who using knives all willy nilly, right?
Yeah, that's a little questionable,
It is.
to
It
say the
is.
least.
It is. But they also discover that the young man also smokes the same brand of cigarettes that was found at the crime scene.
Yeah, but I don't to me, that's not, like, a link because a lot of people smoke Marlboros or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, that doesn't
Well, in 1990, also variety. I don't think they had 27 kinds of camels like they do today or whatever.
exactly, like, that to me
Mhm,
doesn't mean
mhm.
too much.
Right. Well, but get this. So Evan Fager was known to wear gloves, and I'm talking like latex gloves. People would see him in town wearing gloves. And when police bring this up, Evan's like, I actually deliver papers and the ink gets on my hands. So I wear gloves. So, but it was a weird, like I
Weird.
get it. That makes total sense to me. It does. But along with the other things that these traits this kid is exhibiting and the fascination with knives and the other stuff, it just something about it doesn't add up.
Yeah, but for some reason, I don't know, I don't feel like he's our guy, but I do see why they like I get it. The glove thing is weird. It's
Hmm.
like he was, like, practicing for COVID 30 years early.
But he knew things. He knew stuff. So over the next several days, suspicion surrounding Fager grows throughout the community, and at one point, he fans the flames himself because somebody was talking to him about these murders, and they said, "You wouldn't hurt these elderly women, would you?" And Fager goes, "Well, good Evan didn't, but bad Evan could have." And it's
That's
like,
weird.
ooh, so obviously this kid is not doing himself any favors. Like when you're considered a suspect, these kind of comments probably shouldn't be said, even if you're thinking them.
Yeah,
Don't let the intrusive
no.
thoughts win. So,
Don't say these things out loud.
yes. So many are obviously becoming increasingly convinced that Fager is the killer, and city to the point where city politicians pay a private investigator $10,000 to examine this case and basically try to pin it on Evan. And they hope that a fresh set of eyes could like dig up some new information about their prime suspect because police all they had was this circumstantial some of the weird stuff that he was doing, but they didn't really have any hard evidence tying him to the crime. So after poring over the file and conducting interviews, the PI found nothing other than what police already knew. So all police can do is kind of keep a close eye on Evan Fager, and he's the prime suspect. But as far as evidence, they didn't have any against him.
Yeah, again, I can absolutely see why they had to look at him, and I can see why, like, the townspeople were, like, side-eyeing him. You know, like, he was so close to the crime scene, the resemblance, the knives, everything, but, like, I don't feel like he's our guy, but I get it.
Yeah, and I'm gonna bite my tongue a little bit on Evan Fager because his mother is still alive, and from what I was told, it was a just a sad situation. Evan, he was a strange dude, but he's
That's
not a
not a
murderer.
crime.
It's not a crime. It's really not.
Yeah.
And he was railroaded for a while by police, by the
Mhm.
community, and like all of our people from Block 3 are wrongfully accused. They
Yeah.
just I don't know. And Evan ended up passing away in 2016, so I don't want to kind of drag him through the mud more than he already has been. I just wanted to kind of bring you the facts as to why he was considered a suspect. And I'm talking everybody wanted him arrested to the point where police chief at the time, Bud Maxey, he was terminated because there was so much public pressure to arrest Evan Fager for this crime. And he said, I'm not doing it. It's just a circumstantial case. And he lost his job because of it. He ended up getting it back a couple years later through an appeal. But that's what was going on in Starkville in 1990. Evan Fager's the killer.
Thank God that police chief was a good human and, like, didn't bow to social pressure,
Yep.
especially, like I mean, it still happens today, I'm not saying it doesn't, but, like, this is right around West Memphis 3 time, that was in 1993 where, like, the police chief just decided that they did it, and, like, the whole town decided, and, like, we didn't care about the evidence, we just these kids are weird, they totally did it, and I feel like this totally could have been that had this police chief not, like, stuck to his, like, personal, like, code of ethics, you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And he's a good man. He's a good man,
Yeah.
Bud Maxey. So, with
Aw.
that being said, police did explore other angles, and one of those angles stemmed from the neighborhood canvass that they had conducted right after the murder. So, someone recalled seeing a man riding a bike near Kathryn Crigler's house around the time, and he was wearing a camouflage jacket. Very little is known about this man, unfortunately, and police eventually do learn that he was a homeless Vietnam vet who was addicted to drugs and living in the woods in a makeshift shelter. But I picture exactly what we saw in that when we walked around Jason Sweeney's.
Yes.
So police catch up with him and they find stacks of pornographic magazines.
Hmm.
And since this was a sex crime, it was something that kind of fit what they were looking for. But I have to say, like 1990, stacks of pornography were found in every garage in America, like or
Under
ba-
so many mattresses.
or basement refrigerator. Am I right, Dad?
Hint, hint, wink, wink.
But there was no internet, so I mean, I don't find stacks of pornographic magazines weird, and I don't think that having them makes you a violent sexual predator. You know,
No, let the man enjoy his damn porn.
right? Seriously, let him go.
Jesus.
He's supposed to live in the woods and read his magazines. Like, let him
Good
go.
for him.
Well, this guy, he is brought in for questioning and is eventually determined he had nothing to do with the crime. And I remember when we were producing the Murder in the Bayou episode, the network was pushing and pushing and pushing for us to find enough to turn this into kind of a major story beat. So I was like grilling Dolph Bryan about this and just it was like getting blood from a stone though, because we're trying to play up a very small part of the investigation that so it's big to us, but to police, it's like it really wasn't that big of a lead.
Yeah, I feel like since we've started this podcast and I've been like going so deep into this research, and I've noticed how a lot of times the TV shows will like put a lot of emphasis on a suspect, but then when I research through newspapers and other things, there's like little to no information on the person, and it turns out
Hmm.
like they didn't really play that big of a role outside of the TV show. That actually happened in our first ever episode, Jessica O'Grady. The Forensic Files episode made a huge deal about this other guy. And
Hmm.
when I went to research, I don't think I found like anything on him other than what was said in the Forensic Files. And
Right.
I didn't even know that. Like, I always thought he was a major player until I looked deeper into it.
Sure. Well, and this case is a great example. Good luck finding anything on Evan Fager, you know?
Yeah.
So to put a timestamp on where we're at, we're about 36 to 48 hours after the crime, and an autopsy is performed on Betty Jones's body. Unfortunately, nothing new is uncovered. Everything police learned they had already known from the crime scene and talking to Kathryn. And I believe there were a few hairs and fibers found, but they were linked to Betty herself. I believe. Don't quote me on that. I believe. And to make matters worse, the lab has analyzed those cigarette butts that were found, and they did find the presence of a male DNA profile. However, it was too small of a sample to kind of be of any use at the time. So, and let's go now to about 2 months after the attacks, when things go from bad to worse. So, on November 13th, 1990, Kathryn Crigler passes away. And after she was
Aw.
treated and released from the hospital, she couldn't stand to go back to that house where it all happened, which who can blame her for that? So she was
Mm-mm.
moved from the hospital to a private nursing home in Starkville where she died peacefully.
You can't blame her for like not going back. And you all, I feel like she also, like, it's no one's fault here except for the person who committed these crimes.
Hmm.
But, like, what if I was murdered one day while I was, like, dog sitting Gil for you? You would feel so
Awful.
guilty. And,
Right.
like, between the guilt of it happening, like, at her home, along with the survivor's guilt she must have felt, and then just the entire assault and trauma to her poor body and her mind, and I just feel like that poor woman died of, like, a broken heart.
And it's funny you say that because her death was kind of ruled natural causes, but many believe Catherine's. I mentioned that her health took a serious downward spiral
Mhm.
after she learned about Betty's death, and not to mention she had suffered some pretty nasty injuries herself. So the other thought is that she died from the complications of that attack. It just took she hung on for 2 months rather than dying there. So
Well, and I'm sure that the surgery they had to do to repair all her broken bones didn't help, but, just so much to her poor body and mind and just so
mhm,
much at one time.
right. So fast forward about 3 years to 1993, and leads have slowed to a trickle. But the people of Starkville have not forgotten about this brutal crime, and police aren't ready to give up either. They expand the scope of their search to enlisting the help of the FBI, and they also arrange for the case to be featured on America's Most Wanted because we all know back in those early 90s, man, AMW was huge and it helped solve a lot of cases.
With my
So
man.
with your boy John Walsh. So
Mhm.
so when the episode airs in October of 1990, it includes an updated version of that composite, that really rough composite sketch I talked about. So there'd been advancements in technology, so the sketch was enhanced to show what it would look like as an actual photo. And during the live broadcast, you could see the Starkville chief of police. He was manning the phones, and a guy named Jeff Brantley, who was another, our sports fans will know him too, a pitcher. Played for Mississippi State and eventually the Giants. He appeared on the program talking about how Betty was, quote, our mom in Starkville, and just how she like took
Aw.
care of us all. So I mean, these players, pro players who went on to become all-stars and Hall of Famers, played at Mississippi State during this time, and Betty Jones and Kathryn Crigler knew them, you know.
Wow.
So everybody, including the families, had hoped that the national exposure could finally produce a critical clue that's much needed. Like maybe the killer in another state bragged about the crime at a bar, or one of his relatives stumbled upon some kind of key information that, I don't know, now feels compelled to share after seeing the show. And hundreds of tips did pour in from across the country. Unfortunately, nothing really panned out. So, with no other avenues to pursue at the time, the case officially went cold. So over the years, police do occasionally follow up on a tip or two that comes in, but the investigation is stalled. But in 2004, 14 years later, a major development happens when Starkville Police Sergeant Bill Lott, who had recently transferred into the Criminal Investigations Unit, is assigned to take another look at the case. So for the first year or so, Lott absorbed, poured over the
Mhm.
case file, learning, seeing what interviews had been done, seeing what's been said, what evidence exists, and trying to like sear the details into his brain, you know? That's just how Bill works. While absorbing this information, he noticed a critical detail that the DNA from Kathryn Crigler's sexual assault kit had been preserved. And Lott had always made it a point to keep on top of he's an old head. He'll tell you himself, like he's not tech savvy, but he was big on staying on the internet and seeing what's out there. See, like we were talking about earlier, what developments have manifested since
Mhm.
the early 90s, right? So he knows there's some investigative tools that his predecessors didn't have, especially with the advancements of DNA technology. So while not much is known about DNA in 90, Lott believes that this new technology could be the key to solving the case. So in 2005, Bill Lott sends a sample to a DNA tech named George Shiro, and he is a legend in the forensic community. And we don't think of the analyst as legends because you don't really see them. They're behind the scenes and
Yeah.
they're sciencey, you know. So they're not these boisterous public figures like you're used to seeing. But this guy was so down to earth when I interviewed him. I was honored because his name's been thrown. So many cases I'd worked, I'd heard his name. So to sit across from him was awesome. And Shiro gets this sample and he's able to produce a full semen-based DNA profile. So for Lott and his team, that is huge because the presence of like skin cells, sweat, you know, things like that
Mhm.
can be explained away. But why would there be semen inside an 81-year-old woman who
Yeah.
didn't have a husband at the time, was not involved in an intimate sexual relationship with a man at the time. So the profile is essentially rock solid evidence. And now investigators just needed to kind of match it to a name. So Lott sets out to compare his newly developed DNA profile to all of those original suspects in the case. And at the top of the list is Kathryn's former neighbor, Evan Fager. And
Mhm.
after all these years, many still worry about his guilt. They think he did
Wow.
it. And this is crazy because you didn't actually need the person to compare their DNA to. You know how you've heard of rape kits, like obviously
Mhm. Yeah.
on victims, but there's rape kits on suspects. And it's basically they collect some of the similar things to prove if they raped someone or not. And that's what
Right.
they did. They had Evan Fager's rape kit. So I believe he would moved to Arizona at the time. So Bill Lott actually just used Evan Fager's rape kit from when it was collected at the time and did a comparison and cleared him. And it was not a
Wow.
match. Yeah, Evan did not do it.
We knew that. I just didn't think he did it.
I know.
But the fact, though, that he was considered a suspect for so long is heartbreaking. Like, this case, I feel like, has so many victims, like, not only just Betty and Kathryn, but, like,
Mhm.
their families, their loved ones, and then also Evan is a victim, and,
Mhm.
like, I feel like all the people of Starkville, because they lost their sense of safety that day.
Completely agree. And while Bill Lott was disappointed, it does mean that he no longer had to really worry about Evan Fager as the killer. I mean, in his
Yeah.
eyes, the science speaks for itself, you know? It, like the DNA.
Mhm.
And so no matter who in the community, still to this day, there's people that think Evan Fager did it. Like no joke. But the science says otherwise.
Um, yeah, like, DNA is not something you can argue.
No, and I want to talk about this when we have Bill on because remember when I was saying that police chief Bud Maxey was terminated for not arresting him at the time? So if he had been arrested, he would have been put to death. And if that's the case, that means Evan Fager goes down as his legend, his legacy is the murderer, you know, who killed Betty Jones and raped an 81-year-old woman. And all that the real perp would never have been caught. The case would have been closed and Evan Fager's that would have become his what people knew him for.
It's sad to think that happens.
It does. It does. But a big I want to talk to one of the things I want to bring up is Bill Lott sort of changed his opinion on the death penalty because of that.
I get that
Mhm.
100%. But then we have people like the assholes, what they did to Jason Sweeney, and I'm like,
Mhm.
nope, death penalty all the way.
Yep. Absolutely. So the sample is also compared to rape kits from the Vietnam vet who was he's in an Ohio prison now or was. But the lab results clear the vet as well as the other names on the list. And there were a lot of people we didn't get into, but there were over 60 people that were questioned in this case and tested. So, and there were to make matters worse, there were no hits when it was entered into CODIS, the DNA database.
That's nuts that, like, that means the person hadn't, well, it doesn't mean they hadn't committed any other crimes, it just means they hadn't been caught for anything else.
Exactly. So in
Wow.
2009, though, so Bill Lott's working this case, but in '09 he gets deployed to Afghanistan for military service. And when he returned to Starkville in 2013, his commitment to these unsolved murders was refreshed and renewed. It's like he never forgot about him, and he
Yeah.
didn't care. Bill's the kind of guy. He's a dog, man. He will not stop. And I think he told his wife, he's like, if I'm old and crippled and in a wheelchair, you're gonna have to roll me into the like. He's not gonna stop working it until he finds who did it, and we're gonna learn that he did eventually. So
That's incredible, and just his,
it
like,
is.
commitment to the case. It reminds me of, Steve Keelan
Yep.
with why am I blanking on his name?
Blackwood,
But
Bruce Blackwood. Yeah.
Blackwood, well, I know Bruce Blackwood's killer.
Oh, Perez. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and although they didn't get the DNA hit that they wanted, Bill Lott is a big believer in the science. So he knows that it's only a matter of time until this guy is caught or he's arrested again and his DNA is entered into CODIS, and that's when they're going to get him.
It's
So,
gotta be so frustrating to wait, though. I'm
right.
sure that there's so many investigators out there, like, right now as we're talking about this, that are in the same boat, and they are just waiting for DNA to catch up, waiting for
Hmm.
science to catch up a little bit. Like, I can't imagine how frustrating that must be.
I can't even imagine. So I'm going to cover this next part quickly because I may cut it, I may not. So
Oh, okay.
so there's one more suspect I want to talk about. So in 2013, as Bill Lott is waiting for this technology and kind of exploring other leads, he gets a promising tip when he's contacted by Jennifer McWhorter Taylor, who is Betty Jones's niece, and she's actually going to be joining us for a conversation next week along with Bill. So I'm very excited about
Yay.
that. But Jennifer had read some headlines about a man named Felix Vale, and the now 74-year-old Mississippi native. He was originally from the state. He was arrested for the 1962 murder of his first wife in a Louisiana bayou. So on the night of her death, the couple had been trawling for fish, and the woman disappeared. And Vale is also believed to be responsible for killing two other women in which he was romantically linked.
Wow.
So she brings this to Lott's attention, and there was a detail that stood out because Jennifer learned that back in 1990, at the time of the Labor Day murders, that's what I'd never mentioned. That's what this was called, the Labor Day murders. Like you go to Starkville and say the Labor Day murders, it's the Jones Crigler case. They're going to know.
Wow.
So at the time in 1990, Vale had been living in Starkville and he was working as a dishwasher kind of just down the street from Kathryn's home. And what's more, he had blonde hair, piercing blue eyes, and I can't speak to his swarthy complexion at the time, but he did kind of match Kathryn Crigler's description of the killer. So Bill Lott agrees to take a closer look at Vale, kind of believing that there could be a connection, and he's grasping at straws at this point. So I guess anything that holds water would be worth investigating. So he arranges a visit to where Vale is being held in Louisiana, and he makes the 6.5 hour trek to Lake Charles, right in the heart of Bayou country, to meet the notorious killer face to face. So upon arriving, Sergeant Lott meets Vale at the prison and questions him about the Labor Day murders. And for hours they play this cat and mouse game. Like he'll answer
Ugh.
certain questions but not others. And he never really like denied killing them, but he also never took responsibility for it either. He seemed to kind of enjoy putting on that evasive act that killers like to do.
Of
And
course, because they're bored, and it
right,
gets them out of their cell for a little bit.
right. So Lott realizes pretty quickly that the conversation's a dead end. So what he does is he says, you know what? I got a warrant for your DNA. We'll just do it this way. You give me your DNA and I'll be out of here. So Vale has no
Yeah.
choice to comply. And Bill Lott flies home, rushes this sample to George's hero, and it's not the guy. It's not him. So,
Wow.
and he was later convicted of the murder of his first wife and sentenced to life behind bars. So I don't know if Felix Vale is still alive or not.
No, I hope not.
So over the next few years, Bill Lott continues to revisit Betty and Kathryn's case in his free time. Like he was working a 12-hour shift for Starkville and like working other cases, and he would do it on the weekends and at night. I mean, he was so dedicated to solving this case. And in 2017, the tech savvy detective learns about the latest development in DNA technology, and it's genetic genealogy, which was just coming into, the Golden State Killer, like things were starting to crack
Yes.
with genealogy. The state of Mississippi at the time didn't run familial DNA searches. Instead, it relied kind of solely on the criminal databases to compare samples, which had yet to produce a match in the Labor Day murder. And Lott believes that by significantly widening the net of potential matches, genetic genealogy could kind of help them finally identify the killer. So Lott and Shiro asked a team of genealogists to it was Parabon, they worked with Parabon to identify the person whose DNA was found on Kathryn back in 1990. And so there's another, I don't want to get into a whole DNA discussion, but there's another sketch that's released. And this is using the actual DNA, the genetic markers. It's like a picture of VIN number on a car. You got 16 markers,
Mhm.
and they use those markers to be like, okay, we know he has blue eyes. We know he has this, and the DNA is proving that now. So now there's another sketch released. So what the guy would look like in 1990 and what he would probably look like now. So they have that to work with. And also these genealogists then take on the task over the next several weeks of painstakingly building a family tree based on that DNA sample, which is just wild to me.
It's so cool. I still am not gonna lie, like, I still don't 100% get it, but it's so cool.
Well, I have a big name that I'm going after that I'll share with you
Ooh,
later. But if we can get her, we'll just do a whole thing on DNA. She'll talk to us for
that'd
an
be
hour about DNA.
awesome.
So in September 2018, Lott finally gets the call he's been waiting for all these years. So after creating the family tree, the genealogists were able to narrow down the killer's identity to one of three brothers in this particular family. And the oldest was a successful software businessman, so kind of an unlikely perpetrator. They do some more digging. I'm leaving out the fine details, but it wasn't that guy. And there was another brother who was too young at the time. Like it wouldn't have been a kid who did this, like a
Right.
toddler or whatever he was. But the middle sibling, however, appears to be a perfect match.
Ooh, snap, here it comes.
Yes. So the man is 51-year-old Michael Wayne Devon. And when Lott digs into his background, he learns Devon is currently locked up on meth charges in nearby Prentiss County, which is about 90 minutes from Starkville, where ironically Devon grew up. And aside from, he worked a few years as a contractor in Florida, but for most of his life, he was in Prentiss County doing odd jobs. And he was essentially living out of pocket, trying to avoid a digital footprint. So he used cash for things. He
Hmm.
just stayed off the grid. And he also managed to stay off law enforcement's radar too. But 15 years earlier, he was arrested for a felony drug charge in Prentice, but disappeared again after he got out. And then it was in June of 2018 that he appeared back on the radar because of a latest drug arrest. So, like, this guy gets arrested, and then all of a sudden now his DNA is in the system. So now you can start to make that link because this guy, one little drug charge, if he could have kept his nose clean, he would have gotten away with this. I firmly believe
Idiot.
that. And he's an idiot. Yeah. So Lot immediately arranges he needs to get his DNA to like make that one-to-one match. Like you have DNA all over these places that seem to match, but you need that. I want his DNA and we want our DNA sample and you want to match them. So he actually arranges for to get a cigarette butt from Devon when he discarded in jail.
That always gets them,
I
man.
know. So he secretly picked it up and sent it to the lab. And the next day, Lot's grocery shopping with his wife, and Shiro calls and says, "That's your man. You got him." The results show that the DNA profile on the cigarettes matches the one taken from Kathryn's rape kit the night of the murder. So on October 6, 2018, on what would have been Betty's 93rd birthday, Sergeant Lott
Aw.
announces that police have finally found the killer responsible for the city's oldest unsolved murder. He's
Wow.
pretty emotional when he shares the news, and then also details in his press conference how Devon faces charges of capital murder in the death of Betty Jones and sexual assault on Kathryn Crigler, and if convicted, he could get the death penalty. So, following his arrest, Devon has to speak with Lott to propose a deal. He says, "I'll tell you everything you want to know, just take the death penalty off the table." So they agree. And during the interview, Devon admits that back in 1990, he forced his way into Kathryn Crigler's home, where he murdered Betty and attacked and raped Kathryn, leaving her for dead. And he explains how years later he'd seen Lott on TV talking about the crime and how police had the DNA finally, and now they were going to catch him. And he was like, okay, his days were numbered. He was like, it was only a matter of time until police appear on his doorstep and then arrest him for this. So he was shaking in his boots.
That makes me so happy. Like, I
It does.
hope every criminal who's still alive, like murderer who's still alive, I hope every time they turn on the news, they're like, "Oh
Yep.
shit."
And I hope they get a stomach ulcer
I know, right?
from
Oh,
worrying. Yeah.
I love it. That makes me so happy.
So while Devon refused to provide a motive during the initial interview, he later tells Lott that he was high on cocaine and was just looking to rob the women. And Bill Lott, we'll ask him about this next week, but he doesn't believe Devon was being entirely truthful. Like even
Yeah,
if you're under the influence, a petty thief typically wouldn't, like you talked about the violence that occurred in that
right.
house. So Lott thinks there's more going on, but regardless, that was what Devon said. So November 17th, 2020, or about 30 years after the death of Betty Jones and the attack on Kathryn Crigler, then 53-year-old Michael Devon pleads guilty to capital murder and is sentenced to life behind bars. So as part of the plea deal, though, prosecutors did agree to drop the sexual battery charge on Kathryn.
But, like, we never found out how he picked them or the house. Like, this reminds me of James Cushing when they were like, "Well, why did you pick that house?" He goes, "'Cause it was there."
Yep. And this house,
Ugh,
you could have picked. I'll show you pictures offline about this, but it's like there were other houses there. You have no idea why that one. It was
so
across.
weird.
Like when I was there, it's across from a laundromat. It's there's stuff going on there, so it was not probably not the most secluded house you could have picked either.
Like, it's like, I
And
wonder if he had been watching and, like, he knew it was 2, like,
I don't know.
women by themselves? Like, I don't know, that's just so weird that he just
I
happened to like,
know.
why was he even in Starkville? Like, that's just so
I don't
and the
know.
fact that he won't tell anything is just even more frustrating.
I know, and it's like these unanswered questions that people are unfortunately just going to have to live with. They're going to have to just live with the fact that the guy's behind bars, and whether or not why he said he did it is true or not. We got him, and it's over, and we can move on. So that is the incredibly heartbreaking story of Betty Jones and Kathryn Crigler out of Starkville, Mississippi, and it's a story I'll never forget because one, I'd never been to Mississippi, and it was a super cool experience. Like I just really enjoyed being in that state and that town. But two, I made some incredible friends during my time there, and two of them you're going to meet next week, Jennifer McCorder Taylor and Sergeant Bill Lott. So I'm really looking forward to you guys meeting them as well.
Yeah, I have a lot to ask. I'm just so blown away that there's, like, no motive really and no I know he's behind bars, like, that's great, that's obviously what we want, but, like, it drives me absolutely crazy that there's not more of an explanation for anything, and it's like and I know that that gives him, like, one little piece of power, and I
Mhm.
hate that he has any power,
Mhm.
but yeah, this case is really sad, and like I said earlier, just, like, I just feel like there's so many victims and such a ripple effect because of this one shitbag. Like,
Mhm.
he ruined not ru well, yeah, ruined and just, like, altered the lives of so many people,
Mhm. He
which is just
damaged a lot
wild.
of he damaged an entire community, and the
Yeah.
fact that there are people in that community that still think Michael Devon did not do it and Evan Fager did, the collateral damage is astounding, and it's
Read
not
a book, people.
read a
DNA
book.
doesn't lie. Like,
Yeah,
seriously.
anyway.
Wow. That's awful,
Well,
and that just
I will keep everybody again, this one hasn't aired yet. I think it's gonna air in January, so I'll keep everybody up to date on when if you wanna see this on this awesome spinoff that we produced. It looks really good. It looks really I'm super proud of this. So I'll keep you guys posted.
and you'll have to let us know what other episodes you feel
Yeah, there's 6
produced.
of them. We can cover them all on this. I don't care. We'll talk about them all.
Whoop, whoop. Now we
Yep,
got our next
we're planned.
6 months planned. Yeah, that's perfect. Also, I just realized your case took place on Labor Day, and my case last week with Jason was Memorial Day.
Isn't that weird?
That's so
I
weird. I
know.
realized, like, halfway through this episode.
Crazy. Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, that is and with the axes the other day, it was like there's a lot of
Yes. What
I don't
is
know,
happening?
the weird cases we're picking just have we don't know about these similarities until we're talking about. It's like, wait a minute.
That's so crazy.
Nuts.
Well, that was rough, but thank you for telling it, and I look
Mhm.
forward to talking to, Sergeant Lott and Jennifer next week because I have a lot to ask them, and that'll be a really good conversation, and it'll be cool to
Agreed.
have 2 guests.
I don't know how that's gonna work. We'll find out.
I know, right? We're just gonna wing it, guys.
There's
We
gonna be
haven't
little
figured it
windows
out.
all over the damn place. Like,
Yeah, I'll figure it out. It's fine. We're totally professionals, but we're not. Well, this block is all about friends, so everybody needs to take this time to text a friend you haven't talked to in a while just to remind them that you're thinking about them. And make sure you remind your friend that perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
was this guy a pervert?
Abso-fucking-lutely.
Enough said. So Octibahos
What language was that?
Octibahos
Octopus.
ASMR. Octibah.
I just saw something on Google and it was about how like people who write in half cursive, half print, like have trauma, and most serial killers do that, and
Oh my
that's how
god.
I write.
Well, I write in lowercase and uppercase, not cursive, but you write in half cursive?
Yeah, like my letters connect. Like if I'm writing my name, like I feel like the M and the E and the L connect, and then
That
Itha
that's
is
that's
like
called cursive.
yeah, but Itha is 4 separate letters. Like you like connect some letters and not connect others.
It's a like ITS.
No, if I'm spelling my name, I do M,
Oh,
E, and L
Issa.
to get
I was like, what the
not
hell is
Itza,
Itza?
like,
It's a boy.
I just saw that commercial on YouTube the other day. We had a baby eats a boy.
It's a
Remember
boy.
that? It's Bob. They had a baby. He's a boy.
It's a boy.
Remember
Well,
that
but
commercial? It was
I
for, like,
do.
1-800-COLLECT or
I
something?
do.
I don't
It's
know.
old. Yeah, that's an old commercial.
I think I
Well,
was just watching, like, best commercials of the '90s.
I think you're a serial killer then. It's
I
the
think
only
you might be right.
logical only logical deduction.
Clearly.